this lecture is on urban heritage, global conventions and declarations. And in this lecture, I will cover the historical context behind the expansion of the concept of heritage, followed by this some of the dedicated agencies that had passed or that had adopted several conventions, charters and declarations relating to heritage preservation, conservation and management, followed by what are these international charters, conventions and declarations all about, what are the key arguments, what are the key guiding principles that are part and parcel of these charters and conventions, followed by criticisms, challenges and hence what is the way forward so far as the contemporary, the current, the present generation is concerned. So, let me take you to the historical context a bit, because as you know, like even in our school days, sometimes when we had learned about heritage, always it was a monument or a big palace, or like these were all singular entities. What I would like to say is that the heritage, by heritage it meant palatial buildings, it meant mainly the built heritage structures, maybe a road also, but entities which were very, very singular to a great extent. But I think there has been an expansion or a broadening of the concept of heritage, where we understand heritage no more as only singular entities or structures, but also like it is a broad concept constituting and covering multiple tangible and intangible components and aspects. Now, how did this shift, how did this transformation take place, first in our cognitive levels, and then gradually this change getting reflected in the laws, policies and charters, conventions, etc. So, let me take you to the Second World War period, for example, because during Second World War in Europe, some of the cities were devastated and destroyed by the enemy countries. So, one typical example is the city of Warsaw. So, Warsaw was like devastated, 85% of the city and its historic place and the city center of course was destroyed by the Nazi troops, and you can see the picture here. So, this is like the devastated part of the central Warsaw, and so what happened is that then there was a movement by the citizens, by the civilians, and the movement was a kind of so it was in the form of a reconstruction campaign. But the people themselves, the citizens, they were extremely upset with the devastation of the city, because apart from mortality, apart from other costs, severe damage was also done to the history of the city. So, there was an urge, there was a desire, there was an aspiration from below, from among the citizens, that this city needs to be rebuilt again. And a fantastic this Warsaw restoration process, if you see, it was really fantastic, because within the next few years they could really rebuild part of their city. I mean and kind of they could revive the historical aspects, the history spanning from 13th to 20th century, and you see this is an example of the rebuilt, restored Warsaw. So, in this way there was a gradual understanding, there were shifting sensibilities and sensitivities towards heritage conservation and management, where heritage now meant not only built structures, but also built and natural and living traditions of cities. So, so Second World War period can of course be taken as a point of departure, and where we find this conservation ethic, and we find conservation expanding to cover historical urban fabric of cities. So, this is something which this context, I think this political and this historical context needs to be remembered. Now, yes, so if we have to cover some of the very important conventions and charters in terms of the protection of world's cultural and natural heritage, I think this 1972 convention adopted by the UNESCO, it is the first most important convention that clearly talks about the need behind restoring cultural and natural heritage. And if you go through this charter, it is available in the internet. It is you can access it. It is an open access site. You just go to the UNESCO World Heritage Convention website, and you will be able to read all the articles that are part of this charter. So, if you go through this charter, you will see that first of all, this charter was adopted on 16th November 1972, and there is a background to this, because as I mentioned, the Second World War and the post Second World War period, lot of attempts and efforts were there. Arduous efforts were taken by several experts and historians and architects, coming together and discussing about the future of our cities and future of historic city centers, and even including several other intangible components of cities in the form of myriad cultural traditions and facades. So, what is important is that finally, in 1972, in the General Conference of UNESCO adopted this charter, and this is known as the recommendation concerning the protection at national level of the cultural and natural heritage. And if you go there, you will also be able to see which are the states who are parties to this, who had signed this charter, who are part of this entire initiative. But what is very important is that in this convention, you will find what UNESCO actually what the experts could understand about what cultural heritage is and what natural heritage is. So, if you see the cultural heritage has been described or kind of perceived in the form of monuments. So, monuments again implying architecture, culture, painting, structures of special value from the point of view of archaeology, history, art of science, and groups of buildings and sites. So, it is a kind of a broadened understanding and conceptualization. Similarly, it also of course includes natural heritage, because you can see it from the name that it is about the protection of world natural and cultural heritage. So, natural heritage it's about physical and biological formations, geological and physiographical formations, and all the precisely everything delineated all the precisely delineated areas that constitute the habitat of species and animals. This is a very interesting kind of landmark understanding, where you see the expansion even to include the delineated areas constituting the habitat of species and animals, plants, and valuable or threatened of special value from the point of science or conservation perspective. Now, just 2 years after this, because there was all the time there had been criticisms, and which is good, because these are all constructive criticisms, and this constructive criticism actually had led to the broadening of the concept of heritage, which is a good thing. So, challenges and criticisms which are also there now, I think that had made us to a great extent to really push forward the concept of heritage by continuously incorporating in it several elements which otherwise were not part of the heritage understanding even few decades back. So, in 2003, 29th September to 17th September, this draft was made, and then of course, there is always a background to all of these charters and conventions and documents. So, here it was another step ahead. You can see the advancement, because from the name, from the title itself, you can see that how there was awareness to safeguard the intangible cultural heritage, and now UNESCO was absolutely clear about this, that it is also very important to identify, to have a very detailed, nuanced, sophisticated understanding about what intangible cultural heritage actually means and implies. And you see, if you go to this site, I would encourage all of you actually to visit this UNESCO site, and this is this map, if you see, it's what UNESCO says, that it is a kind of a constellation, and it is really a great resource. I personally enjoy navigating this particular constellation, because the font size is very small here, but if you zoom in and if you actually go to this website, UNESCO website, you can click on any of these circles. So, for example, in these circles there is like instruments, costumes, dance, vocal music, festivals, right, family, rituals, and this is a kind of an augmented reality map or constellation. So, you just click on any one of them and you get to know the details. You also get to know some of the examples from the world. So, for example, one of my student, my first student actually, she had my first PhD student, she completed her PhD on one of the folk dances, like one of the folk dancing performative art practices from the Purulia district of West Bengal, and the name of this dance is Chorida. So, it was quite amazing for us when we found the name of the Chorida village and the Chou dance and also about the Chou dancing community from this constellation. So, I think I must appreciate, I personally would like to because there are criticism, I am sure UNESCO is very kind of a critiqued agency, but apart from that I think like apart from this criticism, it is also important to for us to appreciate how like at least there are attempts to accommodate all the different types of cultures and cultural traditions and performative arts and living traditions of the world that are otherwise gaining some weightage and footage through these attempts and initiatives. So, if you like I would encourage you to go through this map and click click some of these like performative traditions and arts and know further details about it. It is quite interesting that how the information they are also they are trying to disseminate how the mechanisms, the mode of disseminating information in an innovative creative way. So, I do not need to explain this further I think, but of course, intangible cultural heritage means which also have to be appreciated, using our sensory perceptions as well. So, all kinds of practices, expressions, knowledge, skills and different types of instruments, objects, artifacts, cultural spaces associated therewith that communities, groups and in some cases individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. So, automatically spontaneously you see that that communities and the cultural performers and people inheriting this culture across generations through intergenerational knowledge transmission, this also become very important at the same time. So, there was a lot of like emphasis on the communities and on their cultural traditions and what they consider to be their cultural heritage. So, this I think is also very important, this particular convention which was adopted in 2003. So, these are some of the activities, they are just very few, but some of you if you want to know the details and of course, if you are doing or you are interested in heritage studies, because heritage is such a broad concept. So, I tell you like in whatever area, domain or in whatever subjects or themes you are working on or you later you aspire to work on, I think somehow as the concept of heritage is expanding so much now. So, somehow I am sure that your research would also be part of this larger heritage understanding and perspective. So, I would definitely like you to I would definitely like definitely request you to actually go through the official websites and know more about these charters and conventions, because they are also quite interesting. But this is very few very like primary fundamental information that I have compiled from the conventions. So, article 11 of the 2001 convention, it like one important thing is that it came up with, it could come up with the World Heritage List and also the list of World Heritage in danger, because if you remember the convention, it also talks about that how and why the threatened spaces, the vulnerable spaces also need to be identified, because they are the sites which can be which should be categorized under heritage in danger. So, and also it means that they are the priority areas where work needs to be done to make them to make them viable and to craft the transition from vulnerability to viability. So, and now like the interesting news is that in the World Heritage List there are around like I think 250 cities which are there in the list, and there are execution plans about how heritage management and preservation can be done. Similarly, like Article 16 of 2003 convention, it talks about same like another representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity and the map of constellation that I showed you there. So, this actually kind of displays some of the intangible cultural heritage from certain areas of the globe. Then again Article 17 from 2003, it also talks of the list of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding, because maybe some of these are getting endangered, and if not protected now, then they will become extinct, and with extinction we then completely lose them, even if it is not there. Like for example, if it becomes endangered and if it gets erased from our collective memory, then that is a major problem, because the world loses that tradition forever. So, then apart from these there are other activities which were which are part of this formation and the functioning of the convention. So, the formation of committees. So, for example, there is this World Heritage Committee which was formed, including several experts from different parts of the world, and then there are like international and national mandates and some rules and regulations, and UNESCO is also working with some of the national governments, some of the municipal governments and groups to where they are together, they are collaborating to safeguard some of the some of the sites and centers and intangible cultural heritage artifacts as well. And one good thing about this conventions are that they also recognize, they also prioritize needs of developing countries. So, I must mention ICOMOS. So, International Council on Monuments and Sites, because it is the only global NGO which is dedicated to promote the application of theory, methodology and scientific techniques to the conservation of architectural and archaeological heritage. And another important thing is that, like as I mentioned about this committees, formation of committees. So, World Heritage Committee, as you know, is also, was also formed in when this 2001 convention was adopted by the UNESCO. So, and ICOMOS is one of the 3 advisory committees which is part of this World Heritage committee, because they evaluate and they assess some of the projects, some of the very important projects and programs. So, ICOMOS is an official partner, it is part of the advisory body of the of UNESCO and which plays a very important role in identifying, but also evaluating the performance in terms of heritage preservation and conservation in different parts of the world and across different aspects, tangible, intangible and all other aspects that are part and parcel within the concept of heritage, which is a broader and larger concept of heritage. So, ICOMOS is it has that strength, because it really has that eligibility, because it is a network of interdisciplinary experts and where exchanges, debates and a lot of brainstorming take place between or among the historians, architects, town planners, engineers, designers, sociologists, anthropologists, different kinds of practitioners and who not. So, in that sense it is a very rich organization actually, and the members, they contribute to improving heritage preservation, the standards and the techniques for each type of cultural heritage property, but property is still the key word. So, buildings, historical cities, landscape, cultural landscape and archaeological sites, and these are some facts and figures to make you know how big and how important ICOMOS is. So, there are like 10,891 members from 132 countries and territories of the globe, and there are 248 institutional members, 130 national committees and 30 international scientific committees. And again, I would of course encourage you to visit the ICOMOS website and see some of the projects, and it is a very fascinating website actually. Now, okay, so till now we had discussed all the positive points, and because they are actually positive, because all these things have happened. So, we should not ignore like the developments that had occurred in the last few decades, in the last 2-3 decades or little more if we take the trajectory from 1972. So, these are the developments that have already taken place, but there are some criticisms from the social scientists, from architects, and from people who pursue critical like scholarships, where urban scholarships actually, where they say that still urban cultural heritage, this concept till date is has not been fleshed out by these conventions and charters, and that is where the limitations, that is where the inadequacies are. So, they say that there is an inadequacy in terms of the fact that city or urban still does not appear in these conventions. So, mainly I am also quoting from two articles which I find to be very significant and relevant. So, one is by Serageldin and the other by Sadowski. They say that still okay, there has been a move from property to performative arts to living traditions, but still property remains the keyword. So, it means that there is some kind of capitalist push, and this ultimately these projects become technocratic projects where you find the same story of heavily capitalist laden investments and little voice to the poor, to the more marginals. And so, that is why they say that and that is why they say that still property is the key word, still property is the key term, and so there is lack of reference to urban cultural heritage. So, then they also provide their own understandings and perspectives about what they understand by city, what they understand by urban cultural heritage, and why and how this should find way, this should find a place within these conventions and charters. So, for example, this is from Serageldin, and Serageldin this is like a little bit of like thick and dense argument, but I think this is important. Every word is important in this quote, because if you really need to engage with the critical perspective, and you need to engage with that. So, Serageldin says that cities are where the future is invented. Okay, so he is glorifying cities. He is not saying that cities are like they are exploiters because they grow by swallowing ecological infrastructure. So, that is he is not saying that. So, what he is saying is that they are very important, they are important spaces, they are important platforms and avenues where the future is actually invented. So, cities are also where the legacy of the past lives on, the history, to inspire dreams and to stimulate new thinking. The urban tissue of the cities. So, I like this a lot, that urban tissue, then the concept of mesh is formed. So, the urban tissue of the cities, the successive layers of their built environment. So, how the city had grown, layer by layer, okay, and strata by strata, and these show. So, if you identify these layers, then you also come across multiple temporalities that had shaped and in turn got shaped through the city building process. Okay, so, the layers of their built environment are a veritable palimpsests, again a very important keyword, of their rich and glorious history. However, it is not just the individual monuments that remain as landmarks in our urban landscape that are deserving of protection. It is the very atmosphere of historic areas, the essence of historic urban character that still marks the cities. Our urban cultural heritage, tangible and intangible, is a major contributor to the sense of place and historic continuity that contributes to forming contemporary cultural identities. Okay, so, the sense of place understanding, place based understanding has to be there, that is his argument all about. So, we need to really have lot of discussions about what a city is. Is it a geographical boundary? Is it an administrative connotation or an entity, or much beyond that across space, time and cultural skills, right. Then Sadowski, who is like more direct in terms of criticizing this charter, these two charters actually. Sadowski is saying that clearly the lack of acknowledgement of the big picture of cultural heritage, the big picture of cultural heritage, which sometimes, as in the case of urban cultural heritage, may be composed of the entangled, and I like this word of course, entangled. So, entangled tangible and intangible elements makes it much more difficult to protect such spaces. What do we understand by intangibility? The way I am understanding intangibility, do you understand intangibility in the same way? So, these are the questions that need to be asked. So, as a result, the protection applies only to their certain elements, never seeing them as a whole, and that is why, and that is where seeing the big picture becomes important. So, this much for now in this lecture, and as I mentioned that I would encourage you to go through these sites. I have also put some of these slides in the references. So, they are the fundamental sites, they are the primary sources of information. Please go through them, learn more about these conventions and charters, learn more about the context, it is quite interesting, and also go through some of these articles and reports where you will be able to then have a better understanding of this the historical context and the notion of heritage, cultural heritage, urban cultural heritage gradually making way by expanding and broadening and strengthening itself and making us better aware about our past and the interconnections between past, present and posterity. So, to conclude, we have discussed the historical context, and the context, broadening the concept of heritage, incorporating built, natural and living traditions of the world. We have also explored the activities of dedicated agencies like UNESCO, ICOMOS to facilitate heritage conservation and management through the adoption of global conventions and charters, and we have studied the limitations of these approaches as well, awaiting more comprehensive and robust tools on heritage preservation.